Bear with me if there's any hang-ups, but the whole idea is that I wanted to present a bunch of useful tips quickly, such that you guys can put these tips into practice right away. So, if you want, open up Excel. I'll open up mine. Okay, cool. So, first up, I wanted to show you guys a little bit about where we're going to go with this. First, okay, so does everybody have Excel open? Still waiting, loading a little bit. Okay, cool. So, first we're going to get started. Just a little bit of an intro. Then an intro to formulas, so I'm going to show you how to do basic calculations, how to do matrix operations, text processing, and lookups and conditionals. One thing that's really remarkable about Excel is that you can use it for pretty much any of your data processing needs, whether it be numerical data or text data. And so we're going to cover sort of that aspect of it as well. Then I'm going to show you a little bit about data organization, filtering, sorting your data, getting what you want quickly without having to resort to programming. Tricks and some keyboard shortcuts. That's just one slide. You could probably just print out that slide and then it'll be like sort of a handy cheat sheet for some quick keyboard shortcuts that I use all the time. And some other functions if we have time. I'll show you the developer tab. Doesn't seem like that's enabled on your computer, so I'll show you how to get to that. ANOVA, which stands for Analysis of Variables, which allows you to do pretty advanced mathematical statistical analysis. And a demo of VBA, which is Excel's built-in programming environment. And finally, I'm going to round it out with some recommended reading and my favorite websites for sort of getting this information and learning more about Excel, because that can be kind of daunting.
Real quick, this presentation is going to be sent to you, and we're also recording the session, and we're going to upload it. If you like,
actually, I would recommend you have like a piece of paper out, maybe. Just like one single piece of paper. I'm not going to fill your notebook or anything, but there is some stuff that I'm going to say that maybe you'll want to write down, and you may not want to watch this whole presentation again to get to that point. So anyway, if you want to take notes, that's fine. If not, yeah, I'm not requiring it. Okay, so first let's get started. A few of the things that I'd recommend for setting up a spreadsheet are the following. Now, I didn't do this necessarily in all of my... I'll just stand up here. So, one of the things that I definitely recommend is to start in cell A3 or A2 or whatever. And if you want to start in cell A1, that's fine. Just add in some rows at the top if you want to. That allows you expansion space to put in extra headers, or for filtering data it becomes easier. Secondly, work down and not right. A lot of times I see people set up spreadsheets where all the data is set up so that the headers are on the first column, and then all the data sort of fills in to the right, but that's not necessarily a great idea, because Excel wants you to put things top to bottom, as evidenced by the number of rows and the number of columns that are allowed in Excel 2013 and above. Another thing, never manually align text unless it's a purely cosmetic spreadsheet. Like if you're just making a form that you're going to print out and there's going to be no processing on it, align to your heart's desire. But never manually align text and numbers. For example, if a number shows up on the left and all your other numbers are on the right, do not manually align that one number to the right. And I'll show you why. Excel likes to manually... Excel actually presents data by alignment. So if it's aligned to the right, it's a number. If it's aligned to the left, it's not a number. So here I have 3 sets of data, and here I just have sums. So here it says sum A1 to A6. You know what? This is going to be a little bit easier to work with, hopefully. So up there you can see where my my cursor is. So here we have sum A1 to A6. And all of these values here on the first column are numbers. This next column here, they're not all numbers. In fact, they're all text. But just looking at this, you wouldn't be able to tell because I've manually aligned everything. And I'll show you this trick later. If you want to force a number to be text, you can put an apostrophe before it and it'll just display the number. This is one of those like bad practice tips I wouldn't recommend, but if you want to do it, you can, sort of thing. And if I sum them, it ends up being 0 because those are not numbers. And here, oh, where's that 1? Well, if I double click on the cell, you'll see that there's a leading space. And so Excel does not process that as a number. So in conclusion, don't manually align your numbers, especially to match other numbers. Okay. Next up, we're gonna get rid of that. Okay. So, one thing that I want you guys to do right away is to set up the developer environment. And follow these steps. Hit File, go to Options. It's the last option in that menu. And hit Customize Ribbon. And click the checkbox next to the developer one. It's the only one that's not checked. When you're done, hit OK. It's just developer right over there. It's the one checkbox that's not checked. Everybody got it? Okay. This unlocks Excel, basically. It gives you a menu to do things that are crazy that I didn't know existed before I learned it on the job. So anyway, we're going to get to that a little bit later. But first, let's go through the basics. Formulas are the basic building block of Excel spreadsheets. So to enter a formula, you just type into the cell that's selected. You hit the equal sign first if you want it, if it's something that you want Excel to evaluate. But to edit the formula, you can either double click on the cell or hit F2 with the cell selected. So for example, if I wanted to make a formula that'll take the cosine of whatever I have here. So if I have pi over 2, can everybody see that? It's very difficult to see. Okay. Huh? No, I can't. The zoom's all the way up. If I try to zoom it, the only direction is that way. And focus doesn't really help either. I didn't get in here before the previous class left, so I didn't have time to do this. And this is my #1 annoyance. Whenever there's a presentation, it's like, okay, the projector doesn't ever work right. Well, it's not my fault. Anyway, so here I have the function pi, and pi is entered with open and close parentheses because it's a function with no arguments. So that allows Excel to internally say, okay, I want to calculate pi to whatever number of decimal places. And I'm dividing it by 2. So this is just equals pi over 2. And I'm going to hit enter. And there's pi over 2 in decimal. Now, say I wanted to edit this formula. All I have to do is double click on the cell, and then I don't have to retype the formula all over again. Because if I just started typing, it would obliterate what I had in that cell. Now, if I want to edit a bunch of formulas, say for example, I have equals a. Okay, so I'll have like 1 here. 1, and say I want to have all of these be equal to the previous cell plus 1. So all I have to do is hit equals and then click on that cell and then say plus 1 and then copy all that down, and it'll give me all those numbers, right? I'm sure you guys have done this. You have not done this. Okay, but anyway, the way this formula works is that it takes the previous cell and copies it and adds 1 to it. And notice how as I copy it down, it iterates. So the row number here changes every time. And that's, I'll explain that in a bit. But say I wanted to edit this so that it's whatever plus 2 instead. instead of going and double clicking on each one and hitting backspace 2 and then double clicking on the next one, all you have to do is hit F2 and it'll bring you to the end of the formula directly. So you can just, burn through this, right? F2 backspace 2, and so on. So F2 is definitely one of those good keyboard shortcuts. I'm just going to leave the magnifier up. Okay, here I'll explain what the difference between absolute and relative references are. Okay, so an absolute reference refers to a fixed cell address. So notice when I copied that formula down, how it actually iterated that number. That's because by default, Excel thinks that you're referring to the cell immediately above. So when you copy the formula down, it'll refer to the cell immediately above that one. But say, for example, I don't want to do that. Let's say I want to refer to a fixed cell address. So for example, let's say I want to have a table of values here. So if this is pi over 2, so this is pi, and this pi over 2, so equals, and I'm just going to copy this down a little bit. Let me delete this. Okay, so here I have a bunch of values of pi, each one is divided by 2, okay? And say I want to take some value here equals, say I want to divide each value in this table by this number. If I just hit equals this divided by that, right? So if you want to refer to a cell in a formula, all you could do is click on it. If I say this and I hit enter and then I copy this formula all the way down, it'll give me a bunch of divide by 0 errors. Why? Because it iterated upon this as well. And if you look at the formula here, it says D14, whereas this is in cell D13. What I want to do is fix that value so that it only refers to that value every time I copy it down. And so what I do is I double click, and next to the cell D14, all you have to do is hit F4. And when you hit F4, these dollar signs will appear, and the dollar signs signify a fixed value. So as I hit F4, you're going to see that it's going to change from $D $14 to D $14 and then to $D14. What that means is that in one case both the row and column are fixed, in another case only the row is fixed and then only the column is fixed. But I want to fix both of them. So if I hit enter here, I copy this formula, well no, I'll just make this one absolute, and then I copy this down, then we have the values that we want. Because all of these values are now dividing by D13. This is going to become useful when you have a table of constants. Say for example if you're in 310 lab and you have a fixed mu and you have a fixed row but you're iterating on velocity and you want to find the Reynolds number, for example, it's just a formula. You don't want those values to change, so you're referring to a fixed address. All you got to do is hit F4 and your problems are solved. Okay, so Excel has a host of calculations that you can do, and if you don't feel like remembering some of the more complicated ones, for example the various arc tangents, all you have to do is go to the Formulas tab within Excel, and I showed an image of 2013 Excel, but you guys have 2016 now. It looks the same though. If you just hit Formulas, you'll get to a whole bunch of different formulas. If you click on, for example, the math and trig functions, as you can see here, you'll see all of these different functions, most of which I don't know at all. For example, base. I wonder what base does, But it tells you the syntax as you hover over it. So that's pretty cool. If you ever wanted to find the information, that's where you would find all the different formulas that Excel has to offer. And you can do pretty much any mathematical operation you want. One thing to remember though, and this is definitely something that I would maybe note down, is that Excel does all its calculations in trig in radians. So if you want to do cosine of 30 degrees, you got to convert that degrees to radians first and then run the trig function. So for example, here I have 30 degrees, right? I don't want to take the cosine of that. So I'll type equals cosine radians 30. And the function radians will convert a number in degrees to radians. And that'll give me the answer that I want. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. That's better. So this is what the function looks like. Okay, moving on. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast?
Is everything going to be all caps like that?
You know what? You don't have to enter it that way. Notice in my example here I didn't enter it that way. All you gotta do is type the full name.
Okay.
It'll automatically convert it to all caps. And this all caps thing is a holdover. You'll notice, well, if you used Excel since when it was introduced in 1985, it was actually not the most popular program when it came out. There was a program called VisiCalc in 1977, and then there was a program called Lotus 123 in the early 80s that really just ruled the roost. But Excel took over from those. And so there's a lot of features in Excel that are sort of undocumented, but they're backwards compatible with those legacy pieces of software. And that's one thing that really cemented Excel, is that you could transfer all the skills that you know. For example, when you type an equal sign, in Lotus 123 it was an at sign instead, which is what my dad uses all the time. He uses at instead of equals, because that's what he remembers from the 80s. But it still works. So, yeah, a lot of little tidbits in there about Excel. But anyway, you can actually do matrix operations in Excel. Now, it's not the most fully featured thing in the world. It's not necessarily the most intuitive. But let me just load MATLAB up real quick. Okay, so say for example, I wanted to take two matrices and multiply them together. Okay, so here I've done that already. Oh man, this magnifier now, it's too big. So I've done that already here. I've set up two matrices, this one and this one. And their product is put here, so I'm going to delete that. In order to multiply two matrices together, first you got to make sure that the dimensions are all correct. Otherwise it'll just throw an error. What you want to do is just make sure that you select the entire area the answer is going to take up. Then, instead of just entering a function, what you got to do is first you got to enter the function. So say I want to do multiply, so that's m mult, and then see how it prompts me for array 1 right here. So all I have to do is select array 1 and then hit comma, which means I'm going to the next argument, which is array 2, which is now bolded, and I select that one, and then I hit Control Shift Enter, and that tells Excel that it's an array formula. If I just hit Enter, it wouldn't work, and if I only selected this cell, it would only put that value in. Now, just to prove that this actually does work, I've loaded up MATLAB, and what I'm going to do is right here I have a series of formulas that converts this matrix into something that MATLAB can just easily read via text processing, which I'll show you later. If you see this formula here, it takes this value and puts it next to the next value, puts it next to the third value, next to the fourth value, with commas in between. So anyway, I'm going to copy this into MATLAB, and I'll copy the second matrix into MATLAB. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply these two together. And as you can hopefully see, the first value here, well, these values, all of them, are exactly equal to the values that Excel gave me. So these formulas actually do work. If you read a little bit about Excel on forums and stuff, a lot of people will complain about its numerical accuracy. Mostly statisticians will complain about its numerical accuracy, but for the purposes of everything that we do here, it's perfect because it's much easier to use than other software packages out there. And there's also a bunch of different functions. For example, this is the inverse of this first function. matrix. Okay, any questions? You sure? Don't be afraid to ask. Seriously, I'm not hell-bent on getting through the entire presentation. If there's something that you want explained more in detail, I'd rather cover things in more detail than try to burn through everything and then have people not understand. So, okay.
What should I type instead of control? I mean, when you calculate the matrix, you said you cannot just type enter.
It's Control-Shift-Enter.
Control-Shift-Enter.
And I have it in here in the presentation as well. So, yeah, just in case you forget, it's right here. And one thing that I realize is very important is to be able to find information about Excel. So you want to do something, you don't know how. There's some great resources that I'll point you towards at the end of the presentation. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Oh, yeah.
So can you do like integrals or derivatives?
Integrals and derivatives are numerically done in Excel, so you would really have to set up a numerical system in order to do that.
But it can't be like a integral.
Well, isn't that an integral?
Well, like it's like I give it x cubed.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not symbolic.
Okay,
No,
not symbolic.
there's no symbolic function in Excel.
Will we have access to those slides?
Yes, the slides, and I'm actually making a video of this. Not sure how great it'll be, but at least you'll have the audio. Of this entire presentation, I'm going to email that to you guys. So that's another reason why you want to sign in, so I can shoot that on to you guys. I'll also post it on the ASME Facebook group if you guys are members of that. If you're not, I can email that out to you. But you also got to sign in. Okay, cool. Anyway, no other questions about matrix operations or anything up to this point? Okay, cool. Text processing. Now this is one of my favorite functions of Excel. This thing is super cool, and you can spend a bit of time learning this and finessing it and making it do things that you would never expect to be able to do with a numerical thing like Excel is marketed as. So anyway, let's get to text processing. Okay, so here's a real world quote-unquote problem. Now, this is a very Vikram world sort of thing, I guess, just because this has to do with decoding serial numbers of old HP calculators. Like, okay, say I have a calculator, say I have its serial number, say I want to know what year it was made. Oh, okay. So, in here, you know what? There. Why didn't somebody think about this earlier? Bam. Control and scroll. Control and scroll. Anyway, so say I want to decode some serial numbers. So these numbers, the first two digits are the number of years since 1960, which doesn't really make sense because HP didn't make calculators until 68, or whatever. The WW is the week in which the unit was made in that year. C is the country code, and then the digits after that are 5 digits that are the sequence number within that month, week, and year. So anyway, here I've generated some dummy data. In that first column, we have some serial numbers. And say I want to extract all the information from it. So say I have this first number. Okay, so the first two digits I know are the number of years since 1960. So in order to get the year, what I want to do is take the first two digits and then add that to 1960. So I start at the leftmost side of that cell, and I take the first two characters in that cell. And so what I did here is I said, okay, left, A16, comma 2. And A16 is the text from which I'm getting the data, and then comma 2 is the number of characters, which it says here, number of characters, which I want from the left. Now, one thing to remember, which I didn't put in the presentation, is that if an argument is in square brackets, then it's optional. So if I deleted that 2 and I put nothing there, it would just take the leftmost character. So I wouldn't have to put a 1 there. And then plus 1960, just to get me the correct year. Okay, so similarly, we take the next two digits, and that's the week. But it's in the middle of the string. So what I need to do is I need to specify, first of all, what the string is. Then I need to specify the starting position from where I'm starting to count. And then I take the number of characters I'm counting from that position, including that position. So for this week, I'll take mid A16, comma 3, because I want to start at position 3. And I want to go 2 characters from that position. So I'm taking the 3rd and 4th character. Now this can get confusing if you're nesting these formulas together. So say I want the middle of this middle, if it was more than 2 characters, then it can get confusing and you would want to set those up separately, you know, in adjacent cells to each other. But that's how you do the mid function. Next, I want the country, and they're according to this code. So A is America, B is Brazil, Germany, Japan, Singapore, and Malaysia / Indonesia, but I just put in Malaysia for the sake of this presentation. Now, what I want to do is take that character. This is the part that you want to focus on right now. Mid A16 5-1. So I want to take the middle character of A16, starting at position 5, going only 1 character. Okay? Now I want to look that value up in a table and match it to a country. Since it gave me what the countries are, I can match it up. So all I have to do is set up what's called a VLOOKUP. Now VLOOKUP is one of the more powerful features of Excel, and what it allows you to do is basically look up values in a table. So how do I do that? Well, I scroll right. And over here, I have a table with the symbol on one side and its lookup value on the other. Now the next step in the presentation is how to do these lookups. So this is how you do a VLOOKUP. Okay, and you might want to do this along with me. If it takes a little longer, that's fine. But what I want you guys to do is open up Excel and type in that table. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna go fill up my water because I'm dying. Right.
Don't die, please.
If I get water, I will.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, it's like we said.
Does everyone have it in?
Yeah, question.
Yes. Does VLOOKUP distinguish?
Yeah. So say we.
That's a good question. Let's find out. Okay, so I'm just going to look up this value in here. 1, 2, 4, 2. Okay, it doesn't. Okay, so basically the way you want to set up a VLOOKUP is like this. Now if you followed the turbo speed version, that's great, but I'm going to explain it slower here. So what you want to do is type equals VLOOKUP into an empty cell, whatever. Sorry, actually just type in like, I don't know, B next to the cell that you want to type VLOOKUP in. Okay, and we're going to be looking up that value, because this is typically how you do it. You wouldn't just type the lookup value directly into the formula. You would refer to some other cell. So type equals VLOOKUP, and then click on that cell. So in my case, B. And then hit comma, and then you want to select that table. So select the entire table, and then hit F4. Because remember, we want to lock the table. We don't want it changing the place where it's looking up values from. So hit F4, and hit comma. And the way VLOOKUP works is like this. So first I type in what I'm looking up. Then I type in where I'm looking it up from. And the way this takes arrays is a little bit different than what you would expect. VLOOKUP only works from left to right, and this is critical to understand. It looks from left to right, so whatever value you're looking up has to be to the left of whatever the matching value is that you want to get out. So for example, if I had 6 columns here, and my country codes and the countries were like out here somewhere, then I would only select the array in which my lookup values were and the looked up values were. Because I only have one column specified within the VLOOKUP, and that here, that would be 2. So I have this array. My lookup values are by default in the leftmost column of the array that I've selected. So if I have a bunch of values here, but my lookup values are over here, you ditch that stuff and only put the lookup values in this first column. So you'd only select that. So for example, let me just put some garbage in here, you know. And then, whatever. Okay, so in this case, I would have to select only this array. Do not select the whole thing, because then it'll think you want to look up values from this column and match them to something on the right. So what you want to do is type in VLOOKUP, whatever cell that your B is in, select this array, and then say column 2, so it knows that the values I'm looking up are in column 2. Now if I change this to a 3, for example, and then I type in some stuff here, that wouldn't work because that array is wrong. So I want to do T20, T7. Okay, so now it's going to take values from here and match them to values in this column because I specified 3 instead. And I hit enter and it would give me 35 because here I have 35. Everybody understand? If you don't understand, please speak now because the next one is a little bit more advanced than this. Good? Everybody good? Sure. Okay. So, say, for example, I have a set of countries instead, and I want to match them to this code. VLOOKUP cannot do that. VLOOKUP cannot work from right to left. And imagine, for a minute, if I had 30 columns like this, and I wanted to match something in column 27 to something in column 2. I'm not going to go switching around columns, especially if I have 1,000 data points, because that would take forever. So what I want to do is set up a lookup from right to left. Now the way you do that is by using 2 functions. One of them is called index and the other one's called match. And I always use this cheat sheet because I can never remember how it's supposed to be typed. But index match works like this. So I type index and then the column I want a return value from. So in this case it would be the column of codes, comma, match, and then my lookup value, which would be whatever value I'm looking up against the whole column of countries. So I'm going to do this here, and this is going to look really bad to you guys, but anyway, so I'll type, this looks, I wish I could get rid of this. Oh hey, look at that. And this is okay. So can you guys read that?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay, cool. I suppose I should ask, can you guys not read that? Anyway, so I type index, and then the column I want to return value from. So it'll be this entire column, and don't forget to hit F4. You guys can type along if you want. Okay, everybody got that F4 in? I want to hammer that point home because that's huge. Okay, so index, comma, match, and then whatever value I'm looking up. So just type in quotation marks, type in USA, for example. That's the value I'm looking up. Now you could easily just type USA in a different cell and then click on that cell to refer to that value, but we're just going to type it in here because I forgot to do that. So match USA, comma, and what column is USA contained in the original data? Well, it's the other column, F4. And then hit comma, and then enter 0. Notice here how when I put in this 0 here, right here, this is very important. This 0 here specifies that I want an exact match only. If I find if there's a table here that I'm looking up some value for, and I want some other value here, say for example, I have a bunch of signups, okay, and one person didn't enter their zip code, for example, okay, and I want to match everybody. I have a table of only names, and I want only zip codes on this side. Now, if I don't type a 0 in there, anytime it finds a name that it doesn't find a zip code for, it'll find the nearest match, because that's the default. And that's dangerous. You never want that. Well, I'm not going to say never. You rarely want that, and it causes more problems than it solves. So definitely always hit exact match, and that's 0. Notice here how it's in square brackets? That's an optional argument. So if you don't put it in, it'll default to nearest, and it won't even tell you. So that's critical, critical. Type a 0 there, type 2 closing parentheses to round out those formulas, and you have your match. And the power of this is, of course, that if I just type, if I type USA here, and okay, one more thing that I wanted to show you guys. I might be jumping the gun here a little bit, but say I wanted to generate a list of dummy data. Okay, I have this list of countries. This is a great list of countries. Okay, there's 6 countries, decent amount of variation, 6-sided die, whatever. Say I'm playing some game and I want to randomly generate a country for somebody, but I don't want it to seem rigged, and I want to have 20 countries here, so each person gets a random country. So what I do here is just type 1 through 6, and what I do is what I personally would do is equals VLOOKUP. Lookup value would be rand. You don't have to type along with me on this. It's going to be a little bit involved. Rand between 1, comma 6. Table array here, comma here. Okay, so what I did is this. Rand between is a random number between 1 and 6. And this recalculates every single time you make a change to the worksheet, which is kind of annoying. And I'll show you what that means in a second. So I'm looking up, basically I typed the numbers 1 through 6, and I'm looking up the country next to whatever random number Excel happened to choose at that particular instant in time. And because the countries are in the 3rd column, I typed comma 3. Enter. Notice how it changed? Did you see that? It was Germany, and then when I entered and exited again, it turned it to Brazil. Okay, great. So I'm just going to copy this formula down. There. Now I have a great list of random teams, right? Or countries, teams, whatever. Now, as soon as I type somebody's name here, it'll recalculate everything. I don't want that. Why are you recalculating every single time? You don't want that. I just want this static list as it is. So when you do that, and this is on my tips and tricks slide, this is awesome. And this helps you out in way more ways than one. It's like the 1,000-trick pony, except it's just one keyboard shortcut. Well, 2, I guess. You want to copy these values, and then go to home, or no, home, paste, and then select paste values here. What that's going to do, okay, so it changed them again. But now, these are all values. If you notice here in the formula bar, this is no longer a formula, this is now a value. So it's not going to change anymore. Now this is a good and a bad thing. If you have a bunch of formulas in a spreadsheet, and you're doing this just to prevent everything from being annoying, don't, because it will mess you up big time. Because if you change, like say I changed one of these values up here, and I want J to stand for I don't know, Canada, for whatever reason, none of that stuff is going to change. Well, none of it, yeah, none of it changed. So like this Japan would turn to Canada, but it didn't. And that can be dangerous if you're expecting it to change and it doesn't. So use this judiciously. Okay, let's get back to the presentation. So there's some conditionals. You can do if, and, whatever. I'm going to burn through this a little bit because I want to get to the end. I want to get to a different slide than this. I don't necessarily need to get to the end. But anyway, oh, first of all, show of hands, how many people need to leave at 5? At 5. About half. Okay. So I'll try to get through this quick, and then if there's enough people who want to stay after, I can show you guys a little bit, because I technically have this room until 6. So, but anyway, so say okay, so I use that random number trick here to look up a random color, and what I wanted to do here is say, okay, say you want to add some kind of a value here that says, okay, tell me if the first letter is A or not of the person's name. Okay, so what you do is if, and then put whatever condition you want. So we covered the left function already. So the first step in this, it says if, and then logical test. So if that logical test is true, then display this value. If not true, display this value. And it gives you a little helpful guide whenever you type in a formula as to what those things are. Notice how value of true and value of false are in square brackets. It'll just put true if it's true and false if it's false if you leave those blank. But now I have a bunch of values here telling me, oh, the first letter's not A. Oh, here, the first letter's A. And here it's A. You can put whatever you want in here. This is obviously not necessarily a super useful thing because you still have to read through this and be like, oh, hey. But it's a demonstration. And for demonstration purposes, I think this is clear. Anybody have any questions on this? If? Yes?
You said for the if you choose your block, they'll automatically choose the first character. So did you have to put that, make that comma 1 or?
No.
No?
Good. I was hoping somebody would ask that. No, I don't. Anyone else? Yeah.
So if you want the value to show up as written, you always have to use apostrophes.
Yes. Quotation marks. Because Excel was programmed in the US and here we use double quotes. There are a lot of other programs that use single quotes and it'll throw an error if you use double quotes. But Excel designed itself to be most user-friendly with itself. And so you'll find a lot of things that are unstandard. For example, when you go to Program Excel in VBA, double equal sign means nothing, and it'll throw an error. The equal sign is used both for assignment and for conditionals. So that's kind of standard for BASIC, but it's not standard for pretty much any other programming language. So, but yes, double quotes around anything you want to show up literally. Otherwise, because you put this equal sign here, it'll try to evaluate whatever that is. So, just for demo, if I get rid of these, it should throw an error. Oh, I guess it didn't. Oh, because it's not A. See? It tried to evaluate this, and that didn't work. Now, if I put this in single quotes, I wonder if it'll work. No. That doesn't work either. Now, this is useful. Excel sometimes gives useful error messages. Very seldom. But anyway, here it says, not trying to type a formula. If the first character is an equal sign, it thinks it's a formula. So if you type equals 1 plus 1, it'll be 2. If you want the actual equal sign to show up, you type an apostrophe first. Remember in the very beginning when I was talking about making things show up as you write them? Put an apostrophe. But that's a bad idea. Okay, next. I'll get to this later. So, tricks and keyboard shortcuts. This is my favorite slide. Because this summarizes a bunch of things that are like crazy good. One thing to paste values. I showed you that already. The keyboard shortcut, if you care to memorize it, is Control C and then Alt ESV. So if I wanted to copy these, Control C, and I hit Control V here, I don't want this to change based on whatever is in this cell. So like if I put in an A here, yeah, it'll give me an error because that formula is incorrect. But anyway, I want to copy these as values. So I hit Control C and then Alt E and then S, which means I'll edit paste special. And then you can select whatever you want from here. Notice how these are underlined. So if I hit V, it'll be values. If I hit T, it'll select formats. C will select comments. And that pretty much works for everything in Excel. So you can hit OK. And then now these are all just values, as I demonstrated before. And yeah, I covered this as well. Useful with rand between to generate dummy data. Now dummy data is great for testing your formulas. Say for example, you have a bunch of free time. Say you have a block of 3 hours of free time, but your lab mates didn't give you the data you needed. You, having taken this workshop, know that you can set up the formulas ahead of time, but in order to test them, you need to generate some dummy data. Now you're going to know approximately the range of what values you're going to be testing, so you can just hit rand between, select two numbers, bam, there's your dummy data. And you don't have to manually type in anything. Auto fit columns and rows, this is critical. Yeah, oh, sorry. Pretty sure you can. Oh, maybe not. But, good question. I did not know that. But one thing that you could do is say random between 1 and like 50,000. And then say equals that divided by, I don't know, 30, 25, now they're floats. So you can get around that. And then you could just copy these down. And okay, here's another one of the things that I want to say. So say I have this, and get rid of that. Okay, and I want to paste these formulas all the way down here. Alright, bless you. I don't have to grab for this little fill handle over here, which you've seen me demonstrate time and again. I don't have to grab for that. All I have to do is hit shift, like select these two cells, hit shift, and then hit the down arrow, and that'll select however many cells you want. Control D will copy that down directly. And then I hit Control C, Alt E, S, V. Oh, I wonder if that worked. No. Alt E, S, V, enter. And then I can delete this first one. There's my floats that I want. Okay. And it also works for right. So say I want to fill this block right here. So I hit 1. And I want to fill this block with 1s. If I hit Control R, that'll copy right. Control D will copy down. Okay? And here's some of the ones that I've covered F2 and I've covered F4. F9 will recalculate the sheet. So in order to demonstrate this, I have a formula hidden behind this button which tells me what folder I'm in and what the sheet name is and what the file name is. Okay, well if you could see that, it thinks I'm still in the conditionals and VLOOKUP sheet, but I'm actually in sheet 1. That's because this hasn't recalculated. Now, if you're doing something with a huge number of these sort of esoteric functions, this function is called cell file name, and it'll give me what location I'm in. If you're doing programming, that becomes extremely useful. All I have to do is hit F9 and it'll recalculate for me. A couple tips on printing that I thought might be of use. If you want to print and show the grid lines when you print, you don't have to manually select all the borders. You don't have to like go in and say, okay, I want to make these heavy borders, and then have it print out and have it look really weird because the borders are way too heavy. All you have to do is when you hit File, Print, go to Page Setup, which is this little tiny link at the bottom, and then go to Sheet, and then hit Grid Lines. And what that'll do is it'll print light dotted grid lines, which make it very easy to visualize your data. Okay, and you can also fit to page and things. And second axis, you can put a second axis on a graph. I'll show that a little bit later if you want. But yeah, here's some bad practice tips. To force leading zeros to show, hit the apostrophe before the number. So say for example I want to type like 004246. Well, that's not going to work because it gets rid of the leading zero. So what I want to do is hit apostrophe and then 0, 0. And it'll show me that. It gives me this error saying number stored as text, which don't manually realign this. Leave it to the left so you know. Okay. Multiple lines in one cell. If you're going to be doing any kind of data processing, please don't do this. It makes it a pain because it stores a carriage return within the cell, and that makes it difficult to parse the text. But if you don't want to do any programming, if you want to type like, okay, this is a line, and then hit Alt-Enter, and then it'll put me at the second line. This is a second line. Enter. There, I have 2 lines in one cell. So if you really want to do that, you can do that too. And it makes data processing pretty difficult. There's also other functions. Show of hands if you want to see these other functions. Couple, not, yeah? Yeah? Okay, sweet. These are in the developer tab that I showed you guys earlier. Feel free to leave if you have to leave, don't worry about it. This whole thing will be posted. And I'll send out a poll later if you would like to see a part 2 to this. Like an advanced functions of Excel sort of thing, where I show you how to really dig deep and process data and create cool stuff. For example, I'll show you this text reader that I put in. So, in my folder where I have all this stuff stored, I have some text documents in which there's some data. It's not very great, but there's some data here. This is a guile, not a file, whatever. Anyway, so I wrote a program that'll allow me to just read everything, every text file that's in the same folder as this file. So if I hit read in text, it's put all the data in those files in separate lines here. Now this can be critical for lab processing, for example. And this is something that I wrote in about maybe half an hour. And I'll distribute this Excel file to you guys. In order to run this, just click this button, but you're going to have to hit enable macros. Now I'm going to show you how to edit this code if you want to. Go to developer. Okay, so on your computer what you will want to do is go to developer, then click on macros. And you're going to see something eventually that gets to something like this. Eventually. Anyway, so as you can see, it's not really that long, but it does something that's pretty powerful. Anyway, so that's macro programming, and that's something that's extremely powerful, and that's something that I have extensive experience in. So if you have any questions about that, if you want to see another workshop about that, please do answer that poll that I'm going to send out via email. I'm going to post it on the group too. And there's a couple of other advanced functions, but I think that I better end it before it gets too long. So thanks for coming. Really appreciate you guys coming out. And if you enjoyed it, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.
Thanks for coming, Mr. Joe.
Oh, you didn't say computer.